January 14, 1952. 03:47 hours, 40,000 feet above the Arctic Circle, a radar blip appears. Closing at 668 miles per hour, Soviet interceptor real or drill, nobody knows. Inside a B-36 Peacemaker's tailgun pod, Staff Sergeant Robert Chin has 8 seconds to rotate his turret, acquire the target, and fire before a MiG-15 tears through his defensive envelope. His fingers are numb. The hydraulics are frozen. And the most heavily armed bomber ever built, 16 20mm cannons, 86,000 pounds of nuclear payload, is about to prove it cannot defend itself. This is the paradox that will kill the flying fortress. 6 rear-facing propellers churn air turned brittle by cold. Frost spreads across Chin's sighting glass. He sits hunched in a metal cocoon barely wider than a coffin, isolated from the rest of the crew by hundreds of feet of aluminum. The intercom crackles. Contact bearing 030 climbing fast. Chin's turret groans as it rotates. But he already knows the truth every gunner whispers in crew shacks after missions. The B-36's radar cross-section glows at 44 square meters. A warehouse on fire in the electromagnetic spectrum. 230 feet of aluminum that Soviet radar operators can track from 100 miles away. Detection happened long before this warning tone. The machine designed to intimidate now betrays itself with every mile flown. And Chin understands what Strategic Air Command refuses to admit: he's not protecting a bomber. He's trapped inside a giant target manning guns that can't rotate fast enough, tracking threats that move faster than his hydraulics can turn, defending an aircraft that's already been seen. One detection could trigger strategic collapse. One miscalculation could start World War III. Can overwhelming firepower ever compensate for being seen first? What happens when invincibility itself becomes fatal weakness? August 1946. Carswell Air Force Base, Fort Worth. The war ends, but the threat doesn't. Soviet tanks sit in Berlin. Communist flags fly over half of Europe. And in Texas, engineers are building the answer, a bomber so massive, so heavily armed, it will make war unthinkable. The Convair B-36 Peacemaker, wingspan 230 feet, 6 28-cylinder Pratt & Whitney radials spinning propellers backward, later boosted with 4 screaming jet pods. Range 10,000 miles without refueling. Payload 86,000 pounds, enough for every atomic weapon in America's arsenal. This isn't just an aircraft. It's a flying declaration that the United States can reach any target, anywhere, anytime. Strategic Air Command makes it the cornerstone of nuclear deterrence. Crews train over the Arctic, flying invisible borders where one navigation error could start the next war. But there's a problem nobody wants to admit. The B-36 is too big. Maximum speed 381 miles per hour, slower than fighters from the previous war. Service ceiling 45,000 feet high, but not high enough. And the killer radar cross-section of 44 square meters. In an age where Soviet radar networks are multiplying across Siberia, the Peacemaker doesn't sneak. It announces itself. So engineers do what they've always done: add guns. 16 20mm cannons in 8 remote turrets. Nose-tail, dorsal, ventral, and retractable side pods that extend like steel thorns. General Electric analog computers calculate firing solutions automatically. It's the most sophisticated defensive system ever mounted on an aircraft. The gunners are World War II veterans, men who survived B-17 missions over Germany, who fought through flak over Tokyo in B-29s. They know cold. They know fear. They've already proven their courage. But this isn't 1944 anymore. The missions are brutal. 24 hours without relief, circling the top of the world at altitudes where the air is so thin you can see the black of space. Gunners sit in sealed pods accessed by crawling through tubes barely wide enough for a man. The cold defeats every heating system. Metal conducts temperature faster than bodies can generate warmth. Fingers go numb on triggers. Frostbite becomes routine. And the isolation hours alone in a pod the size of a phone booth connected to your crew only by crackling intercoms that fail more often than they work. The psychological toll is worse than the physical. You're defending America's nuclear deterrent, but you're doing it alone in the dark at the edge of Soviet airspace, where one mistake means World War III. Strategic Air Command produces confident publicity films, showing gunners tracking targets with mechanical precision. Headquarters briefs Congress on the impenetrable defensive network. Generals assure the public that the B-36 can fight its way through any threat. But late at night in crew quarters, after another Arctic patrol, the gunners talk quietly among themselves. They've read the intelligence reports. They know Soviet MiG-15s are climbing higher, flying faster. They know radar is getting better. And they're starting to understand something that will change air warfare forever. In the jet age, being seen means being dead. The question isn't whether the guns work, it's whether guns matter at all anymore. Can you defend what you can't hide? 1947, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio. The first test flight that changes everything. Gunners climb into turrets for live fire trials over Lake Erie. The target drone appears. Fingers squeeze triggers. The cannons roar and the turret shakes so violently the gunner loses his sight picture completely. Spent casings jam the feed mechanism. The guns fall silent. Inside the pod, the gunner is alone with a weapon that just failed him. They fix it. They always fix it. But with every fix, another problem emerges. Electrical wiring snaps under vibration. Vacuum tubes, the primitive brain of the fire control computer, burn out mid-flight, leaving gunners staring at dead scopes. Maintenance crews work through the night, replacing components, rewiring systems, chasing ghosts in hundreds of feet of electrical conduit. Strategic Air Command orders keep training. The Cold War doesn't wait for perfect. 1948, Eielson Air Force Base, Alaska, where cold becomes the enemy. Temperature 40 below zero. A gunner extends his retractable side pod for a training exercise. Within 3 minutes, frost blinds his optical sight. Within 10, he can't feel his fingers. By the end of a 6-hour patrol, frostbite has taken 2 of his toes. He's not alone. Medical reports pile up. Hypothermia cases, nerve damage. One gunner passes out from cold in his pod. They don't discover him until after landing. The heating systems can't win against physics. Metal conducts cold faster than human bodies can survive. But the missions continue. They have to. Soviet bombers are being built. American deterrence demands readiness. 1949. The nightmare becomes real. Intelligence reports flood into Strategic Air Command headquarters. Soviet radar stations are multiplying across Siberia, a web of detection spreading across the Arctic. And the B-36's radar signature is catastrophic. 44 square meters. Soviet operators are tracking test flights at ranges exceeding 100 miles. Then comes the math that changes everything. MiG-15 maximum speed 668 miles per hour, B-36 maximum speed 381 miles per hour. In a tail chase, the Soviet jet closes at 287 miles per hour, nearly 5 miles per minute. A gunner has seconds to acquire track lead and fire before the interceptor is through his envelope and positioning for a kill shot. Computer simulations run at Wright-Patterson. The results are classified immediately. They're too damning to share. 1950, June 25th, North Korea invades the South. The theory becomes reality. B-29. Super fortresses, smaller, faster cousins of the B-36, fly daylight bombing missions. Then Soviet-piloted MiG-15s appear. What happens next terrifies every Strategic Air Command planner watching from Washington. Boeing bombers fall from the sky. Gunners fire desperately. A few MiGs take damage. 1 or 2 fall. But the kill ratio is devastating. The turrets that saved bombers over Germany and Japan are obsolete. Jet speed and altitude have rewritten the rules, and the new rules are written in blood. The lesson screams from every after-action report: guns can't save you from what you can't catch. But the B-36 fleet keeps training as if Korea is an anomaly, as if the future isn't already here. 24-hour missions over the Arctic. Crews pushed to breaking points, gunners isolated in pods where the silence breeds paranoia, where failed intercoms leave you uncertain if you're forgotten or ignored. One gunner later admits, You start wondering if they'd even notice if you died up there, just another frozen body in a metal coffin at 40,000 feet. Trust fractures between pilots and gunners, between crew positions separated by the length of a football field. You can't see your crew. You can barely hear them. You're alone with your thoughts and the cold and the creeping realization that this isn't working. 1951. The technology fails faster than they can fix it. Vacuum tubes can't handle the stress extreme cold, then heat vibration shaking them for hours. Mid-flight system crashes leave turrets, dead computers dark. Gunners switch to manual control, but now they're trying to hit a 700-mile-per-hour target with iron sights and frozen fingers at 7 miles altitude. It's impossible. The gunners know it. But they keep training because that's what orders say. Every mission exposes the same brutal sequence. Soviet radar locks the bomber long before visual range. Interceptors launch from forward bases. By the time the B-36's turrets even detect the threat, enemy pilots are already calculating firing solutions from positions of overwhelming advantage. The gunners feel it in their bones, that sick realization that courage doesn't matter anymore. Skill doesn't matter. They're not defending anything. They're manning obsolete weapons in a flying target, waiting for someone in command to admit the truth. How do you fight when the war has already evolved past you? The turret network is supposed to be perfect. A three-dimensional chessboard where every angle is covered, every threat neutralized. 8 gunners, 16 cannons overlapping fields of fire, calculated by engineers who promised this system was unbeatable. Forward turrets head-on attacks. Dorsal positions climbing threats from below. Tail guns, the classic 6 o'clock approach. Retractable side pods, beam attacks from 3 and 9 o'clock. On paper, nothing gets through. The reality is different. Bogey bearing 270 Angels 45 diving fast. The tail gunner's hands move automatically. Turret rotation switch engaged. The servos whine. Hydraulic fluid sluggish from Arctic cold responds slowly. Too slowly. The General Electric analog computer hums calculating lead angles, but the target is already inside the intercept curve. The MiG-15, or in training the F-86 simulating one, is diving at 650 miles per hour. It covers 1 mile every 5.5 seconds. The B-36’s turret rotates at 15 degrees per second maximum. The math is brutal. The gunner has 8 seconds total to visually acquire, rotate the turret, achieve proper deflection lead, and fire a sustained burst. 8 seconds against a target moving faster than most World War II fighters' maximum speed. The first burst misses. Always. The second burst tracks behind. By the third, the jet is gone already, repositioning for another pass, while the gunner is still trying to reorient his turret through hydraulics that fight him every inch. Training exercises over Nevada prove it again and again. Tracers arc through empty sky, beautiful, useless streams of fire hitting nothing but air. The target is already 3 miles away, untouchable, setting up for another attack run. Strategic Air Command knows they're losing, so they try everything. 1952. The Parasite Fighter Experiment. The craziest idea in a program full of desperate measures. McDonnell XF-85. Goblin, a tiny jet fighter designed to fit inside the B-36's bomb bay. The concept, when interceptors approach the bomber, opens its belly and launches its own fighter. The Goblin engages while the bomber escapes. Then it hooks back onto a retractable trapeze system mid-flight. The first test pilot nearly dies. The Goblin tumbles in the bomber's turbulence, the hook missing the trapeze by inches, while the pilot fights for control at 20,000 feet. Recovery rate 30% in perfect conditions. In combat conditions with battle damage, weather, and stress. The engineers won't even estimate. The program dies quietly. The Goblins go into storage. The B-36 is alone again. Next attempt, electronic warfare. Crews start carrying primitive radar jammers, vacuum tube oscillators that generate broadband noise, trying to blur the bomber's massive signature. Sometimes it works for a few minutes. Sometimes it fails immediately. Sometimes the equipment catches fire from overheating, filling the fuselage with smoke at 40,000 feet. Even when jamming works, it only delays the inevitable. You can blur your signature, but you can't hide 230 feet of aluminum. Soviet operators compensate, adjust frequencies, and the bomber appears on their screens again, bright, clear, doomed. Then Soviet doctrine evolves to kill the concept entirely. Mass-coordinated attacks. 6 MiGs from different vectors simultaneously. Now the tactical problem becomes impossible. A single gunner can barely track one target. The network of 8 gunners can't coordinate fast enough when threats come from every direction at once. Fire control computers can only calculate one solution at a time. Intercoms fail under the stress of multiple gunners shouting vectors. The bombers try defensive box formations, flying close enough that their fields of fire overlap. But that just creates a bigger radar target and makes collision a constant threat in turbulence. In crew shacks, after failed exercises, gunners stop talking tactics. There's nothing left to discuss. The chess game is rigged. Every move they make, the enemy has already countered. Speed beats turret rotation. Altitude beats effective range. Numbers overwhelm coordination. One veteran gunner, a man who survived 30 missions over Germany, says it plainly, "In 44, we had a chance. FW-190s were fast, but we could track them. Here, we're not even in the same fight anymore. We're trying to play checkers while they're playing a different game entirely." The tactical core of B-36 defense isn't the sophisticated fire control system or the experienced gunners or the overwhelming firepower. It's hope. Hope that Soviet radar fails. Hope that weather provides cover. Hope that diplomacy prevents war. Because every simulation, every test, every honest evaluation reaches the same conclusion: if Soviet interceptors come, the guns won't save you. When the tactics don't work, courage becomes a liability instead of an asset. Spring 1952, Strategic Air Command Headquarters off UTT Air Force Base, Nebraska. A classified directive arrives without warning through secure channels, unannounced combat readiness evaluations effective immediately. No advance notice to crews, no preparation time, no scripted scenarios. B-36 bomber crews will face simulated MiG-15 intercepts during what they believe are routine patrol missions. Performance will be measured with brutal honesty. Deficiencies will be documented without mercy. Failure will be analyzed. The order is framed as standard operational security procedure. But everyone above colonel rank understands the real subtext. Headquarters needs definitive proof the turret system works under realistic combat stress. Or definitive proof it doesn't. June 3, 1952. 14 to 20 hours local time, over the Bering Strait. A B-36 crew flies a standard Arctic patrol route, the 4th such mission this week. Radar screens show clean, empty air. Gunners rotate through mandatory rest cycles, half sleeping in seats where cold seeps through flight suits despite heating elements. The intercom carries only routine chatter position reports, fuel calculations, weather updates, monotonous professionalism. Then a blip materializes on the radar scope without warning. Closing fast from the east, no drill announcement, no preparation alert. The radar operator's voice jumps an octave, adrenaline stripping away professional calm. Contact bearing 090 range, 40 miles high-speed closure. Gunners snap alert, instantly training overriding exhaustion. Turrets rotate with hydraulic groans audible through the airframe. The fire control computer whirs frantically, calculating intercept geometry from radar data. Fingers tighten on triggers, muscle memory from thousands of practice hours taking over. Every man knows intellectually this is likely evaluation, but adrenaline ignores the difference between simulation and reality when radar contacts close at combat speed. The blip closes with terrifying velocity. 30 miles. 20. 15. Dorsal gunner's voice cracks through intercom static. Visual contact. 2 aircraft high and fast, commencing attack dive. The targets are F-86 Sabres painted in red aggressor markings, simulating Soviet interceptors with faithful accuracy. They plunge from 50,000 feet speed, building past 600 miles per hour closure rate, absolutely catastrophic. Turrets track desperately, servos howling under maximum traverse demand. The fire control computer locks theoretical solutions, but the jets vanish from viable firing arcs before triggers are fully pulled, passing through engagement envelopes faster than hydraulic systems respond. 3 seconds of opportunity. The Sabres scream past untouched, pulling high G turns that would shred the B-36’s airframe into falling debris. Simulated kill confirmed A, crackles over the radio in exercise controller's dispassionate voice. Official, final, absolute. The turrets fall silent, motors idling. Inside the tail pod, a veteran gunner, a man who shot down 2 Focke-Wulf 190s over Germany in 1944, who survived 27 missions through flak-filled skies, stares at empty air where the target was. His hands are still steady despite age. His aim was geometrically true. His training was impeccable. But the target moved through his defensive envelope faster than hydraulic systems could physically respond. Physics, not skill, determined the outcome. The exercise repeats systematically across the Strategic Air Command fleet over subsequent weeks. Different crews, different bases, different gunners with varying experience levels. Same result every time with mathematical consistency. MiG simulations streak in from altitude advantages. Turrets swing desperately. Cannons would fire in actual combat, but engagements end before defensive fire becomes tactically effective. The mathematics are undeniable. Documented in after-action reports, detection happens long before visual contact, and speed collapses defensive windows to zero utility. In classified debriefing rooms, officers document failures with bureaucratic precision that cannot disguise the disaster. Gun camera footage shows turrets tracking empty sky seconds behind actual target positions. Radar plot overlays reveal the brutal truth in visual form. Interceptors achieve firing solutions before defensive systems fully activate. The forbidden realization spreads through the gunner community like frostbite, slow, numbing, inevitable, painful. They're not defending the bomber. They're occupying a tactical role that technology has rendered meaningless. Crews begin improvising unauthorized countermeasures born from desperation. Some gunners rig crude chaff dispensers from modified flare canisters, hoping to confuse radar tracking systems. Others experiment with primitive electronic noise generators, trying desperately to blur the B-36’s signature on enemy acquisition radars. The modifications violate regulations. They're born from the same survival instinct that drove World War II crews to add extra armor plates and additional machine guns, the belief that human ingenuity and determination can overcome systemic doctrinal failure. It can't. The math forbids it. One evening, after a particularly brutal evaluation flight that recorded 4 simulated kills, in 6 minutes a tail gunner sits alone in the enlisted crew shack, hands wrapped around coffee, gone cold. Another gunner, younger and still believing in solutions, asks what he's thinking about. The answer comes quiet, stripped of institutional illusion. We're not protecting this plane anymore. We're bait holding the line until someone figures out what replaces us. The twist isn't tactical innovation or unexpected victory, it's existential and crushing. The men defending America's nuclear deterrent have become passengers in a strategic weapon system that cannot be defended by human courage or mechanical firepower. And everyone from the gunners freezing in pods to the generals pushing papers at headquarters knows it with certainty now. The only question remaining is how long institutional momentum can sustain illusion against reality. October 1953. Eielson Air Force Base. The final test. Strategic Air Command assembles a full B-36 formation, 6 aircraft, 48 crew, 96 cannons. The mission penetrates simulated Soviet airspace against coordinated interceptor response. This isn't training. This is validation. Proof the turret doctrine can survive, or proof it can't. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. The bombers climbed to 43,000 feet, forming defensive box formation designed to maximize overlapping fire. Each gunner checks systems. Fire control computers come online. Intercom chatter is clipped focused. Radar operators watch screens. Waiting. 10 hours. First contact. 8 F-86. Sabres flying MiG-15 profiles appear at 60 miles. They climb fast positioning for high-side attacks, exploiting the B-36's worst blind spots. Strategic Air Command has choreographed this carefully. Interceptors will use actual Soviet tactics from Korea. The formation tightens. Turrets rotate toward threat vectors. Gunners breathe slowly, fighting adrenaline. The jets dive. 16 20mm cannons erupt across the formation. Tracers arc through thin air, brilliant against pale sky. Inside sealed pods, gunners wrestle turrets through maximum traverse, trying to track targets moving 3 times their bomber's speed. Fire control computers calculate servos, scream hydraulic pressure spikes. But jets are already inside the envelope, slashing through defensive fire before gunners complete first bursts. Simulated missile launches flash across radar screens. Electronic kills painting B-36 fuselages with virtual destruction. Kill confirmed Peacemaker 2. Kill confirmed Peacemaker 5. The formation fractures. Bombers peel away, executing evasive maneuvers that strain airframes never designed for combat maneuvering. Turrets continue firing at targets that vanish and reappear from impossible angles. Inside the lead aircraft's tail pod, a gunner watches his scope. Reticle tracks a diving Sabre. Lead locks. His finger tightens and the target disappears below traverse limit, pulling 7 Gs through a turn that would kill a B-36 crew. The simulation ends with brutal finality. Virtual parachutes bloom across radar, symbolic ejections, marking crew losses. 6 bombers, 18 simulated kills before reaching target zone. Even with perfect visibility, unlimited ammunition, no combat stress, the formation is devastated. The exercise concludes. Aircraft return to base. Gunners climb from pods' legs, numb hands cramped. Nobody speaks in the crew shack. There's nothing left to say. Debriefing rooms fill with silence heavier than words. Officers review gun camera footage frame by frame. Evidence is irrefutable. Turrets track empty sky while interceptors maneuver freely. Firing solutions arrive seconds after targets exit range. One colonel watching the footage finally speaks, "We're training men to die in airplanes that can't protect them." The climax isn't explosive. It's quiet, the sound of doctrine shattering against reality. The most heavily armed bomber in history cannot survive the war it was built to fight. January 1954. Carswell Air Force Base. Turrets fall silent. Strategic Air Command issues new directives. The B-36 fleet transitions from frontline nuclear deterrence to secondary roles training platforms, reconnaissance, strategic reserve. The turret gunner career field collapses. Men who spent years mastering deflection, shooting, learning fire control systems, enduring Arctic isolation now face obsolescence. Transfer orders arrive. Gunners retrain as radar operators, electronic warfare specialists, ground crew. Some resist. Most accept the inevitable. The profession that connected them to a legacy from B-17s over Europe to B-29s over Japan ends not with a final mission, but with a memorandum. March 1954. Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Engineers dismantle turret systems. Analog fire control computers stripped from airframes. Turret pods removed, holes sealed with aluminum patches. 16 20mm cannons per aircraft go into storage, joining thousands of obsolete weapons in desert boneyards. The weight savings are significant, the symbolic loss greater. Some B-36's continue flying, but they fly defenseless, relying on altitude speed modifications, electronic countermeasures. The admission is unspoken, but absolute guns cannot save what radar has condemned. June 1954. Strategic Air Command Headquarters. Doctrine changes. New bomber designs eliminate manned turrets entirely. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet carries no defensive guns, only speed and altitude. The B-58 Hustler follows. Even the B-52 Stratofortress carries minimal armament, a single radar-directed tail turret token gesture rather than tactical necessity. The era of the self-defending bomber ends. Air superiority becomes prerequisite. Fighter escorts, electronic warfare standoff weapons replace the idea that bombers can fight through enemy airspace. The gunners scatter. Some leave service returning to civilian life with skills the world no longer needs. Others adapt within the evolving Air Force. A few stay close to aircraft working ground crews maintaining machines they once defended. One former tail gunner takes a job at Boeing helping design the B-52. His input is noted but ignored. The future has no place for men in sealed pods firing cannons at jets. February 1959. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base. The last B-36 lands. The fleet retires completely. Giant airframes bake in desert sun. Some scrapped, a few preserved in museums. Most corrode aluminum empires disintegrating. No B-36 ever fires its guns in anger. The 16,000 pounds of defensive armament never kills an enemy. The elaborate turret network, the analog computers, the training, all of it exists between preparation and obsolescence, built for a war strategy outpaced. The men who manned those turrets carry knowledge silently. They were prepared for sacrifice. They trained for combat. But history moved faster than policy, and their war ended before it began. Sometimes the cruelest fate isn't defeat, it's becoming unnecessary. The B-36's failure reshapes everything. Within strategic air command lessons are absorbed brutally. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet doubles down on speed and altitude, abandoning defensive turrets entirely. Maximum speed 607 miles per hour. Service ceiling 40,000 feet. Defensive armament none. The philosophy is radical: don't fight, outrun. The B-52 Stratofortress follows. Despite carrying a tail turret design, emphasizes standoff weapons, electronic countermeasures, fighter escort. Crews no longer train for defensive gunnery. They train for evasion, electronic warfare, delivering weapons from beyond interceptor range. Stealth emerges as logical conclusion. If detection equals death, invisibility becomes survival. Lockheed's Skunk Works begins experiments with radar-absorbent materials, studying ways to reduce cross-sections that doomed the B-36. The philosophy that births the U-2 SR-71 and B-2 Spirit begins with one lesson: being seen is being dead. Standoff weapons proliferate. Air-launched cruise missiles allow bombers to strike from hundreds of miles away, never entering enemy airspace. The doctrine of penetrating bombers flying deep into hostile territory fades. The B-36's guns are replaced by missiles requiring no courage, only mathematics. Fighter escorts evolve. Bomber self-defense gives way to layered protection fighters, clearing airspace, electronic warfare aircraft, jamming radars, tankers, extending range. Strategic bombing becomes coordinated system, not single aircraft burden. Soviet strategists watch and learn. MiG development accelerates, not to fight bombers, but intercept them before launch range. Radar networks expand. Surface-to-air missiles emerge as primary bomber threat. The arms race shifts from guns to sensors, firepower to detection. The turret gunner profession vanishes worldwide. Last man defensive positions disappear by the 1990s. Modern strategic aircraft carry no provisions for gunners, no sealed pods, no analog computers. The role becomes historical footnote. But human cost lingers. Thousands trained for missions that never came. They mastered skills the future didn't need. They prepared for sacrifices history didn't require. Some adapt, some struggle. All carry the weight of becoming obsolete while young enough to fight. In Air Force academies, the B-36 becomes case study in strategic misjudgment, warning about clinging to doctrine past usefulness. Cadets learn specifications, turret layout, operational history. But the real lesson is subtler technological change moves faster than institutional thinking, and the gap kills those caught between. Aviation museums preserve the aircraft. Restored B-36's sit in climate-controlled hangars. turrets, frozen cannons silent forever. Plaques describe specifications, mission significance, but they rarely mention the men who sat in those pods, fingers numb from cold scanning Arctic skies for threats that would have killed them before they fired. The legacy isn't the aircraft. It's the lesson: when strategy clings to outdated power, it endangers those sworn to carry it. Change, however necessary, leaves casualties among the prepared. In the quiet museum hangars where the Peacemaker sleeps under controlled temperature and humidity, its silence speaks louder than its guns ever could have. The aluminum skin is pristine, now polished lovingly by volunteers who never flew combat missions, never felt Arctic cold seeping inexorably through pressure suits, never tracked targets moving faster than sound through optical scopes fogged by frozen breath condensing on glass. The turrets rotate smoothly on restored hydraulics during quarterly maintenance. The 20mm cannons gleam under carefully positioned museum lighting. Everything works perfectly, a machine preserved forever in the precise moment before operational reality proved it obsolete. Visitors walk slowly beneath the enormous wings, craning necks at the sheer engineering scale. 230 feet of institutional ambition made aluminum. 10 engines representing the transition between propeller and jet eras. 16 cannons embodying faith in firepower. The raw numbers inspire automatic awe. But numbers alone don't tell the human story of men sitting isolated in cramped pods for 24 hours straight, fighting cold and creeping doubt, defending an aircraft that couldn't defend itself against the future. Sometimes, late in quiet afternoons when museums empty and crowds disperse, sunlight slants through high hangar windows and illuminates the tail turret position with almost sacred quality. You can see clearly the cramped seat, the worn control grips the optical sight, still calibrated precisely for targets that no longer exist in the form it was designed to engage. It becomes easy to imagine the gunner who sat there during the Cold War, some veteran of World War II, probably carrying hard-won skills from one conflict into another, believing absolutely that experience and courage would protect him and his crew. It didn't, because the next war never actually came. And perhaps that's the real legacy worth preserving. The B-36 failed comprehensively as a practical weapon system, but it succeeded strategically as a deterrent. Its very existence, massive, visible, bristling with guns and nuclear capability, forced Soviet strategic planners to invest enormous resources in countermeasures, to build faster interceptors, to develop sophisticated radar networks. The arms race it unintentionally triggered consumed resources and attention that might otherwise have fueled direct military aggression. Its tactical vulnerability paradoxically became its strategic value. The men who manned those turrets through Arctic nights never fully knew their real mission. They trained to fight. They prepared mentally to die. But their true historical purpose was to be visible enough to prevent war through deterrence while being vulnerable enough to force institutional change before that war arrived. History leaves a permanent warning etched in aluminum, written in the empty gun ports and sealed turret pods. When strategy clings desperately to old definitions of power, it directly endangers those sworn to carry it forward. True defense lies not in overwhelming force alone, but in the institutional wisdom to change before force fails catastrophically. The Peacemaker's guns never fired in anger at enemy aircraft. Perhaps that's not failure at all. Perhaps that's victory measured in a currency we consistently forget to count: the wars that never happened, the men who came home alive, the future that arrived without requiring their ultimate sacrifice. In the end, the strongest fortresses aren't constructed from steel and firepower alone. They're built from minds humble enough to admit when steel isn't enough anymore. Sometimes the wildest machines weren't madness, they were the necessary bridge between what we knew and what we needed to learn.